in surgery. So I'm just going to start off by just saying that RACS acknowledges the Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander people as the traditional owners of the land that we are all on today, and extend our respect to elders past, present and emerging. As a binational college, RACS acknowledges and respects the Ngāiwi Māori as the tangatoa whenua of Aotearoa, and is committed to upholding the principles of Te Tiriti o Waitangi, fostering the college's relationship with the Maori, supporting Maori fellows and trainees, and striving to improve the health of all Maori people. So today, this session is co-badged with Beyond Science, and we've got some really amazing people talking to us about how we might have an idea about something, and we want to then take that idea and make it into a piece of equipment or something that can really change healthcare in the future. So we've got three amazing speakers. We've got Anne O'Neill, Professor Laura Poole Warren, and Dr. Emma Charters. So we're going to start off with Anne O'Neill. And Anne is currently the Director of Commercialisation and Strategic Partnerships at the Office for Health and Medical Research at New South Wales Health. Anne has over 25 years of experience in the health, medical research and policy sectors. She's responsible for leading the development and implementation of major policies and programs to enhance medical research capacity in New South Wales and raise the profile of New South Wales research and development nationally and internationally. She was the architect of the New South Wales Medical Device Fund and co-designed the New South Wales Commercialisation training program with Cicada Innovations, both which have been critical to accelerating the development of New South Wales intellectual property and the next generation of innovators and entrepreneurs in New South Wales. She holds a Bachelor of Science in Physiology and Pharmacology with honours and has an Executive Masters of Public Administration. She's a Fellow of the Australian Academy of Technological Sciences and Engineering. So thank you, Anne.
Thank you. I appreciate that. And so, and thank you, everybody. So lovely introduction by Pecky. I hope you can see my slides. Yes?
Well, the fact
yep.
Yes.
Is that working?
Yes.
Yes, excellent. Thank you. That's hurdle one done. So yes, I'm Anne O'Neill. I work in the Office for Health and Medical Research in New South Wales Health, and it's really my great pleasure to be talking with you today and hopefully answering any questions that you might have about what we do in this space. And also I'm going to try to reflect on what some other governments do as well. So I'd first like to start by also acknowledging the traditional owners on the land of which we're variously gathered. I am now sat in the lands of the Camaragal people. I'm putting this image up because we've just recently launched our New South Wales Health Research and Innovation Strategy, and this is the image that we commissioned for that strategy. So I did want to start by some of the some of these might be familiar to you. These are some established and emerging sort of New South Wales grown innovations. These are from the sort of in the medtech space. Obviously, Cochlear and ResMed would be hopefully very familiar to you, but there are quite a number here that we have funded through the Medical Devices Fund. And I particularly wanted to, which I'll go into a bit more detail about, but I particularly wanted to call out in the bottom right corner there, Australis Scientific. Was actually one of our more recent emerging success stories. It's a tibial nerve stimulation for incontinence, which is about controlling urgency anytime, anywhere. The founder of this particular company did our commercialisation training program, received undiluted funding from the Medical Devices Fund, and also undiluted funding from Harvard because they received the President's Award. And 18 months post-incorporation, they were able to raise just over $10 million Australian seed round, which is really quite incredible considering how short a time they've been in place. And the reason I'd like to call out Australis Scientific is because actually one of your colleagues is the Chief Medical Officer and co-founder as well. So I'm not sure if Danielle is online. I couldn't see now that I'm presenting, but Danielle, if you're there, if you can put your hand up, otherwise we'll throw to you during the Q&A. But Danielle Delaney is part of this success story. And I think the reason why, one of the reasons why our Medical Devices Fund and other funds like it have been so successful is that real clinician engagement in the narrative, but also really trying to solve a problem and not just be a solution looking for a problem. So if I can move on to this is specifically for New South Wales, but there are other funds around Australia and New Zealand like this. We set this fund up over 10 years ago. It's now close to 14 years in the making. It really was about accelerating that development and commercialisation of medical devices that may have a global benefit. And so what we were really aiming to do was keep IP and talent in Australia and increase the uptake of those devices into the health system. And it's not a huge amount of money per annum. It's $8 million Australian per annum. We've put about just over $90 million into 48 technologies so far, but the return on investment has been really quite brilliant. It's been $2 billion raised in public and private capital to date. The founders have actually run around hundreds of trials, delivered millions of units into to the global health system, and also increase the size of their companies. And I think that this is a fund that is well worth looking at if you're in New South Wales, but also if you're looking to come to New South Wales, it's also a fund that would be relevant for you. Other commercialisation funds by the New South Wales government sit with the Office of the Chief Scientist and Engineer. They're also worth a look when they're open, mainly because sometimes the technologies that you might be working on may be relevant for those funds. So we have the Biosciences Fund and the Physical Sciences Fund, and sometimes you can actually align what you're asking for within those funding, within that funding. I also wanted to call out where we can access venture capital, because that's obviously something that's top of mind when you're developing IP, is at some point you're going to need to go to much bigger pockets than state or federal governments. So Brand and Biocatalyst, actually, this is one that is relevant for both our Australian and New Zealand counterparts. It is Australia's biggest venture capital fund investing in life sciences, but it also has members from New Zealand as well. So just so that you're aware that you also can have access, if you have the right access to those members in New Zealand as well as in Australia. They have over $1 billion Australian funds under management. New South Wales Health has been a member since 2011. They also support a thing called Curator, which is a biotechnology incubator. It provides undiluted funding, which is really very good at those very early stages. And they've just been refunded by our National Research Future Fund to the tune of $33 million. And also, really importantly, in the manufacturing space, if that's the type of space that you end up getting into, particularly in Australia, is that they've just partnered with our National Reconstruction Fund. I'd also like to call out And Health, mainly because I know that not everyone is in the sort of the device space or that kind of space, but working on things like such as software as a medical device. And Health is our leading provider of support and services to that digital and connected health sector. And also delivers accelerator and incubator programs and supports our own commercialisation training program, and has also received another just over $30 million from our Medical Research Future Fund to actually accelerate those digital and connected health technologies. In terms of our own commercialisation training program, it has been around for over 10 years now. We've trained thousands of candidates in that. They've also taken their technologies to market, run trials, supported patients, and have actually been very successful in getting a return on investment of just over $150 million. And they've also launched their own companies. And we've seen a significant number of female founders in those companies because this is experiential learning. It allows people to dip in and out, and also allows for the fact that not all career paths are linear. And so to really responding to that and sort of encouraging female founders. We also have what is called the Australian Clinical Entrepreneurs Program. You'll note there that this is about specifically supporting clinical entrepreneurs. We do that in partnership with MTP Connect and other societies, as well as LaunchVic. Applications are closed on Monday, but if anyone's interested, please come to me and I will see what I can do if this is of interest to you. So if you think that this is something, it's a very short form to actually enter the program, and I would love to see, if people are interested, if I can assist you to get access to that program. These are our contact details if you're interested in reaching out. We'll share these slides, of course, and look, I wish you all the very best for this webinar and also into your journey in terms of technology development, entrepreneurism and commercialisation. Thank you.
Thank you very much. We did have a little pre-meeting and we were talking about sticking to sort of 10 minutes each. So well done, Anne. That was amazing.
The winner.
I've taken my slides down, haven't I? I'm good. Excellent.
Yes,
Great.
Laura's been very nervous that she's going to go over 10 minutes, and I've assured her that it's okay.
Yes.
So our next speaker is Professor Laura Poole-Warren, who holds the position of Professor in Biomedical Engineering at the University of New South Wales and serves as the co-director of the Tyree Institute of Health Engineering. She leads a research group focused on design and development of novel materials for neural electrodes and other soft tissue interfaces, and on 3D engineered neural tissue models. Key themes of her research are on designing biosynthetic materials that incorporate signals for improving biological performance, and on understanding material and device compatibility with cells and tissues. Throughout her career, she has worked across academia, industry and government, and in 2020, she was awarded a Member of the Order of Australia for her exemplary service to biomedical engineering and education. So we're really honoured to have you speak to us today, Professor Poole-Warren.
Thanks, Pecky, and thanks, Anne, for an absolutely great segue into, you've mentioned a few of the things that I'll be very quickly alluding to, but I'm coming to you. Can you see my slides okay? Can everybody see my slides?
Yes.
Yeah, good. So I'm coming to you from Bidjigal land, which is over in the eastern suburbs of Sydney, and I'm actually standing here in the Prince of Wales Acute Services building. So the new Acute Services building, we have a section where we do our work in the Tyree Foundation Institute of Health Engineering. So what I'm going to talk to you about is more on medtech innovation, and just really three quick things, few career reflections, a bit on the medtech innovation ecosystem, and then some points on early stage entrepreneurship. So career pathway, this is a really busy slide. I don't want to go through it. In essence, my career has been in academia, largely in academia, but I've also I jumped out for a few years and spent a couple of years in a startup company in the USA. I also, for 10 years, was on the TGA expert committee for medical devices. And so learned a huge amount about the regulatory system in Australia and beyond. And have also worked in sort of medtech IP and also product development. Just some reflections on the sorts of things that you really pick up through this sort of, wacky career pathway. In the medtech startup, I think one of the things that really really struggled with was we started with a technology and we were looking for an application. So we pretty much spent about a year trying to find an application. So speaking to clinicians, trying to understand where we could use our technology. It's not the right way of doing it. It's very definitely having a needs pull is a much better way of doing it. And so I think that was that value of the clinical need pull before you get into the technology really, really sort of came home to me during that period. Working with tight budgets, obviously, and the importance of good governance. So to get investment in what you do, you really do need to have a good team with the right expertise around you and have really good governance in place. It's what investors are looking at. So 10 years with the TGA on the expert committee, again, sitting around the table, a lot of the experts around that table were clinicians. and really experienced clinicians who were able to really help evaluate some of the difficult cases that we had to evaluate. I was the techo on the committee, and honestly, I learned so much from those clinical insights. Understanding reg recs is really important in this space, obviously, which you'd all be pretty aware of, but developing robust documentation from the very get-go to make sure that you've got that documentation in place is really important. And then career and academia leadership, we'll probably learn a lot less in that, but understanding the technical constraints is a really critical part. So often we'll talk to clinicians and they'll sort of say, well, what's possible? Can I do this? And that's something that you really do pick up over a career in biomedical engineering. And of course, again, good leadership team and networks are critical. So I don't know if anybody's got their microphone on, but does anybody recognize this person here who's speaking with her finger up?
Oh,
Very,
Fiona
very,
Wood. She
very,
gave,
so
she spoke
very,
at one of our webinars.
yes, very
earlier.
famous Australian, and she spoke. This is her speaking at the Connecting the Dots symposium in 2022, and just special guests here are Gordon and Pale's heads. So this is Gordon Wallace and Pale looking at Fiona. But Fiona gave a talk on her innovation journey at this Connecting the Dots session, and it was really fascinating because, she basically told this sort of 25 to 30 year story where, when she started, she thought it was going to be really simple, idea, innovation, implementation. As long as I've got manpower, the smarts and some money, it's going to be able, I can do it. Her take-home message was really, actually, the pathway was really difficult, and she really at many points struggled and went down blind alleys. And so, looking back, her wisdom of experience was that this is a really difficult thing to do. And it's very difficult to know when you haven't got any experience what you should do. So this is what one of my colleagues made up, just looking at the UNSW healthcare innovation ecosystem. So if you're sitting in UNSW and you think, oh, I've got an idea, what do I want to do? There is just so much around you, and it's very hard to see the wood for the trees. Another way of looking at this is a sort of a much more nuanced way of looking at it, where the New South Wales medtech innovation ecosystem, you can actually look at in terms of the different capacities or capabilities under the different areas. So whether you're at that sort of finding your unmet need, whether you're actually getting towards facilitation or funding, there are different places to go. But even in this case, where you've actually got things sort of mapped out a little bit, if you're not really au fait with the whole system, it is really difficult to navigate it. And you can see on this slide, several of the ones that Anne has mentioned in her talk. So I guess the next stage is really to have a look at, if you have an idea during surgery or when you're having a shower or whatever when you're thinking time, you have an idea what's next. And so I just really wanted to talk about some of the ways of approaching that. And it's actually a really well-described process. There is a lot of work that's been done on this globally. And these are two of the ones I think are really good and really clear. And they look complicated on the slide, but the first one on the left is the CIMMET Gates program. And so that's basically based on a medtech innovation cycle, and it breaks down the activities that you need to do and the questions you need to answer under technology, regulatory, market business, and clinical in this cycle. So starting with need and going right round the cycle to the standard of care. This is based in Boston. It's been going for, I think, about 30 years. And it's a really quite a rigorous way and systematic way of looking at the innovation process. The other one I've put there, which I think is very important as well, is Stanford Biodesign. So you might have heard of that as well. It's more was sort of started up as a real education program in innovation and biodesign, but it's quite similar. So I'll just sort of take you through the early stages, which I think are the critical ones that you really do need to think about when you have that first idea. So under CIMMIT, what CIMMIT does, as I mentioned, they start with the need. Biodesign also starts with that needs finding and screening. When you look at CIMMIT, I mentioned the 4 domains. They ask questions, or they get you to ask questions under each of the domains. And these are sort of just summarized. What are the 4 key questions that you need to ask under looking for a need? And the thing is that clinicians are really well placed to actually, with their knowledge and experience, they're really well placed to answer some of these questions. So what are the current solutions? What's the disease state / unmet need? What are the strengths and weaknesses of existing solutions? And then what's the regulatory landscape in the space? So, just getting some answers to those questions and starting to document it is something that usually an individual can do. There are ways of getting help, and I'll talk about that a little bit in a little while, well, hopefully a couple of minutes. But in essence, the first part is really something I think clinicians can do pretty easily and pull together, thoughts from colleagues, etc., to really build their story. In biodesign, it's very similar. I won't go through that, but it is a very similar process. And these are all available on the web, freely available. You can access all of this. But then the second stage, so once you've got that unmet need, that sort of need really mapped out, the next part is to actually working out is what do I do to actually meet that need? And so it's the idea. And often we start with the idea rather than starting with the need. And I really do think starting with the need is critical. So getting into the idea, there is again a pretty structured way of looking at this, setting your hypothesis, experimental design, idea screening, looking at the intended use, likely regulatory pathways, starting to do drill downs into competitors, value propositions, stakeholders, and then looking at the benefit, clinical feedback, etc. And you can see similar sorts of things happening over in the biodesign. They call it the invent process. This is where you're potentially going to be developing your IP. And this is where it does start to get a bit more complicated, because with IP coming in, you do need to have to think about, well, who can I go to? Who can I trust? How do I actually work this out? And if you're in a public hospital system, it's often quite hard to find those sorts of or that sort of expertise. So I think I'm going to stop there, and I just really wanted to finish with I went back to Fiona Wood and said to her how much I appreciated the story that she gave at Connecting the Dots. And I said, so what would be the one piece of advice you would give somebody about, entering an innovation journey? And she said, the best advice I can give is to do careful due diligence on those who promise to help. So obviously she was burnt. I think a lot of people get burnt in the process because they perhaps jump in to the deep end too quickly and don't do those early things to really validate the idea. And then also making sure that they've got a team of people around them who they can trust. And that's really critical, as I mentioned before. And I did mention I'm in the Tyree Foundation Institute of Health Engineering. If you want to take a screenshot and look at this QR code, you can actually come to us and have a chat with us. It's completely free, IP free, etc. We're really happy to have a chat with you. We have support programs as well that we have once a year that you can apply for, but anytime you can come to us for a consult. So regardless of where you are in Australia. So I might finish there and pass on to Emma.
Oh, thank you so much. That was really great. So I know that we're all watching this, and I have to say I am very imaginative. And I always think, I don't know who these people are who've come up with these amazing medical innovations and things. And so our next speaker is basically one of us. So when we had our pre-meeting, Emma was at home. She had young kids. She was trying to sort out bedtimes and all of that. Her husband had just, I think they just swapped places at the airport. She'd come in from a conference. He was leaving for a conference, and it was the whole thing. And so definitely for everyone who's on this webinar, Emma's like the shining example of what you can do. So Emma's a speech pathologist. Some of you might know her from Chris O'Brien Lifehouse. She has developed a service with an integrated research agenda focusing on communication and swallowing rehabilitation after head and neck cancer. Her research interests are on swallowing and communication rehabilitation after transoral robotic surgery, and restoration of oral competence following facial nerve injury, jaw reconstruction, and trismus. She finished her PhD in 2021. And her thesis examined the impact that advances in head and neck cancer treatment has on swallowing and communication outcomes. And it's through that work that she came up with a novel device. And I'm going to let her talk about it, so I won't spoil the surprise. Thank you, Emma.
Yeah, thank you so much. It's lovely to be here. Thank you for inviting me. I'm coming from Gaggle-land, and I'm going to be talking through RestoraBite, which is a jaw-stretching device that we've taken from a clinical sort of scenario where we had an unmet need to market. These are two of my fabulous co-inventors and co-inventors for the RestoraBite, but also we hold the patent for the design. So just sort of starting at the end, I figured this is the device that we've made. It's a class 1 medical device, which is the easiest of all of the medical devices, I might add. It's been ARTG listed in Australia. We have a patent in Australia, Europe, and the US. I think it's a good example of, and it's my only example of innovation through a clinician researcher lens. I'm primarily a clinician, then do a bit of research and innovation on the side. And then commercialization plan is for August, like now, in the next month. And that's ready to go. And I think from a clinician point of view, I think there's lots of barriers, and I think you all probably know all the barriers about how to do research in clinical time and how to maybe come up with a medical device or a software or anything like that. And we've got so many in the clinical time. So I think I read somewhere in one of the Nature papers recently that under 10% of medical devices reported in the literature will go through to progress to a human trial, which seems devastatingly low. We all have really high clinical workloads, and I think burnout is quite high even with just a clinical load. There's no funding for this a lot of the time, although some of the stuff that Anne was and Laura was talking about is very, very encouraging and exciting, and lots of opportunity there. Training and time is hard. But as Laura was mentioning beforehand, I think from a clinician point of view, we understand patient needs and we understand what their needs are and what their unmet needs are. I think having that access to patients for trial recruitment when you get to that phase and for consumer input is really quite incredible. We are embedded in health services, and so that's translation opportunity, and then our clinical MDT. And Laura was just talking about the expertise of the people around us, and I think that's something that I've really benefited from just the clinic being in a clinical context. So I'm going to just talk you through. This is a model that Masako Dunn, who works at Lifehouse, did for me. And I think it takes us through a very basic approach from what we've done with the RestoraBite. So we started with a clinical need, and it was an unmet need for people with trismus, which is restricted mouth opening. Then we went through the concept and feasibility, which is all our benchtop testing. We did clinical trials. And then we've gone through our regulatory approval, and then it's sort of that post-market surveillance, which is just happening now. So what we were sort of faced with, and every time a surgeon referred me another patient with trismus, I groaned audibly because we had no good options for them. Trismus is a really horrible condition. They can't open their mouth. It makes eating, drinking, and talking really difficult. You can see a couple of examples of it here. One of my patients described it as, you can't really enunciate your words. People can't understand you, constantly mumbling away. It's frustrating for me and my audience. And then you have the minor challenge of getting food in your mouth. And then if we sort of expand that out a little bit broader and understanding what that need is, we have reduced oral care and reduced oral hygiene. Their speech is unclear. They have difficulty chewing and biting food. Imagine being on smoothies and puree your entire life. Oh, sorry. And then you have challenging oral access for, looking at cancer recurrence and airway access. And so all of the implications of that on functional, but also quality of life outcomes are quite significant. Then as a clinician as well, we also know what solutions are out there, and there are solutions out there that have been explored. But for us, they were costly, and that was a huge barrier for our patients, or they had issues with infection control, with safety, and with efficacy. We knew that it was a big problem, so we've estimated there's about 140,000 new cases of trismus per year worldwide, and that number is increasing because there's an increasing number of people getting diagnosed with oral cancer. That demographic is reducing in age, and so it wasn't just a us problem. So then we wanted to have a look at a bit more of an understanding about what that problem was. And so we did an interview across Australia with clinicians and health professionals who were treating people with trismus. We were looking at the barriers for them managing people with trismus, and it was often people were in a lot of pain. There was a therapy plateau, and problems with efficacy. Cost was a problem in getting the best types of devices, and there was uncertainty about clinical care and exercise regimes, and with safety. And those barriers were all the same that were listed in a study that was done in 2009. And so we're sort of seeing a stagnated landscape, I suppose, in trismus management. And so then we were looking into prototyping, and I had the very great fortune of working with an incredible team of clinicians, engineers, and researchers which were in-house at Lifehouse, which I was really, fortunate to have. This is just a snapshot of the people who have been involved. They started helping us with prototyping. So this is only a couple of the different device prototypes that we had along the way. It's been 3D printed, and so that the device design, the material, the thickness of all the different things have changed quite a lot over time. We did a lot of benchtop testing. So this is a universal testing machine to look at the pressure, because the pressure was really important for us in terms of safety as well as how it works. And then we did cyclic testing, which is the graph on the right, that sort of shows to see whether the device is maintaining its strength over time. Then we needed to have that co-design with patients, sorry. And so we were testing it with patients. We had ethics very, very early on, which was also really critical for us. The device was breaking, so we needed to change the composition. We were talking about the engineers and the prototyping process. We were asking the patient about what they liked and what they didn't like. We were looking at their outcomes in terms of their mouth opening and then their quality of life, and getting their input along the way. And this is our design as it stands at the moment. It is simple. There's a big frame around the side. It's 3D printed using a nylon powder. We can create it in bulk, and we've got the option to change to injection mold manufacturing later on to reduce the cost. But that's the next step in the line. So to do that, some of these have been already mentioned. The AusSet program, which Anne mentioned earlier, was invaluable. So I did that a couple of years ago. It's a year-long training program with mentoring, but also workshops to take you through on an individual level, but also on a group level. What do you do? Because I had no idea what to do, and we had lots of in-house support. But I think having an external mentor and an external training group was really helpful. The Cicada Innovations, the New South Wales Health Commercialisation programs, and the medical device training programs were really helpful. They also took you through at various degrees at different times about what information you needed and how you could connect with people who were the right people to talk to. The Sydney Knowledge Hub at University of Sydney, and the Sydney Local Health District pitch training have all been really, over the last few years, where I was seeking most of my guidance about how to learn different things, and that process is still ongoing. And then there was an in-house concept development workshop at Chris O'Brien Lifehouse, which I did. Funding is obviously huge. We were really lucky again that there's an in-house grant round called February at Lifehouse, which gave us the start of a little bit of funding, which meant that I had a day off to do a little bit of dedicated work on this, as well as working on through the clinical trials that we've done, because research we've co-worked with the innovation part of this. And we got some funding from Sydney Cancer Health, Sydney Cancer Partners, again, smaller grants, which are a little bit less competitive, and that we're happy to have new ideas. And then we sort of applied for a bunch of awards, which also sort of fed some of the funding things, but also the networking things, and expanding our engagement with industry, but also other clinician researchers and other innovators who were involved. And then we talked about this earlier on, but the crazy commitment load, I think I was finding quite overwhelming. So burnout is a huge risk. I think when we're working full clinical loads, but also doing a new device and also running research trials and trying to run home to make sure you don't forget to pick up your kid from school. I think the risk, while this is all, it was really exciting over the last few years, it's been something that's really kept me engaged in my clinical role, because there's obviously a merging between the research and the device development and the clinical role. That's all merged, but it's also impossible to manage. And I think from my point of view, I think what I wanted to say was that it's really hard to put boundaries on your time, and that tends to seep in quite a lot. So I think just being kind to yourself and prioritizing various different things and assuming that it's going to take a lot longer is really important. Then we went on to the clinical trials part of things. These are my speech pathology team at Lifehouse. They're all spectacular, and they have been really instrumental in working on the research part of this, because we didn't want to just create a device. We wanted to work out how to manage trismus in a broader sense, and RestoraBite does feel part of that, but not the whole thing. And so we started with 2 phase 1 trials, which had a they had 19 in one cohort, and I think maybe 12 in the next one. So we were looking at whether trismus can treat and rehabilitate trismus. Sorry, the RestoraBite could rehabilitate trismus, but also whether it could either minimize or prevent it in the adjuvant radiation setting. So we started with this small sort of feasibility trial, which had just 10 weeks of exercises and outcomes at 0 and 10 weeks. They went quite well. And so we progressed to our phase 2 trial, which had 120 patients. And then we looked at them not just at baseline and 10 weeks, but also at 6 and 12 months. So sort of broadening out the feedback loop from patients, but also testing it in a wider number of patients to look at the feasibility, safety, and efficacy. And then one of the first things in terms of the validation and regulatory approval that we did through the OZCEP, but also in the Cicada thing, was working out a business model canvas. So I'd never thought about this before, and this was quite helpful to sort of start thinking about what resources we have available, whether that was sort of infrastructure, sort of mentors, and that sort of stuff. What your goals are, what are the challenges, where the costs and revenue streams are coming from. I thought that was quite a helpful exercise, and it was one of the first things that got us all to do. We had to go through the TGA approval. I had no idea about how to do any of this, and it was just a really good exercise in engaging some of your other networks and everything. It was quite helpful. Misako Dunn, again, is an absolute angel at Lifehouse, who has been taking us through a lot of this stuff, and she's certainly somebody who we couldn't have done it without. We had to go through clinical trial notification, and this is where that sort of the infrastructure of the hospital was really helpful as well, because we have a research unit that's very active and has been able to manage some of the admin around this, because again, as a clinician by myself, I couldn't have done it. Then we had to go and create a quality management system. So I think all of these bits and pieces, I know there's lots of information on these slides, but mostly it's not possible to do it by yourself. I think engaging the expertise of a wider team, which Laura alluded to earlier on, is really important. But also as a clinician, you tend to have a couple of those networks, and that's been invaluable. We had to go through patents. We were supported by Lifehouse to organize the patent, making sure we were doing NDAs and a whole bunch of different out of the admin tasks we hadn't thought a great deal about until we got there. And then we've got a whole bunch of ideas for where we're going in the future, both in terms of research, but also changing the design to make it cheaper and more cost effective. This is the last part of things I'm going to speed through now, I think, at my time. But we're going through a whole bunch of qualitative interviews with patients, but also clinicians. We've established a data safety monitoring board, because we need to be managing any sort of adverse events that come out of it. And we're building a website and developing our commercialization program right now. Our marketing strategy, we've decided to partner with our hospital. None of us were in it to make a whole bunch of money. We just wanted to sort out this clinical need. But we also had to create a business strategy that was sustainable, and that none of us were going to be a CEO of any sort of spin-off company. So we just wanted to have something which we could commercialize, but we weren't going to dedicate our entire life to. So that's the marketing strategy that we went to. Some I suppose challenges. We had lots of challenges. I can talk about that later on. What's kept me sane, though, was staying in my clinical caseload, because I think that's what I'm good at. I'm not very good at commercialization. Research is something that's also developing for me, but I know I'm a good clinician, and that's kept me not feeling like a complete failure as I'm going through this, and feeling like the learning curve is not completely astronomical. The MDT and SB and my speech pathology colleagues have been fabulous. Having an entrepreneur mentor, and I've had a couple for various things, have been integral. And then I think building that story with research and not just focusing on the medical device, but having a look at the overall pathway has been the things that have kept me sane. And that's my email, and I'm really happy to talk to anybody at any stage. Thanks.
Fantastic. Thank you so much for that, Emma. That was really great. So where we're up to now is we are going to basically be opening up to questions. So if anyone's here and you would like to ask some questions, this is your opportunity to ask questions. And Pyle has already jumped in with a question. So Pyle, do you want to ask your question?
Yeah, well, thank you to everybody. That there were amazing talks. I suppose I'd love to ask all three of you. You all deal with entrepreneurs who are, both men and women. What do you find? I just really want to ask a gender-specific question in terms of what do you find the risks and rewards for women, especially, hearing Emma's talk about burnout. Emma, why bother? What were the reasons that you pursued, and what were the rewards that you got out of it? And then would love to hear Laura and Anne's view in terms of how to support that, to support females in the space who have numerous other responsibilities.
It's a great question. I think I was reasonably frustrated in clinically and felt like that I wasn't doing a good job with the trisma space. And so I think this was a way that we could problem solve ourselves and could listen to patients and then and have that feedback loop of we had a real need, like what Laura was saying, we had a real need, and that was quite motivating. So I was still getting these patients coming across my desk and I didn't know what to do with them. So that was one thing. In terms of the burnout thing, I think I've had to be better at saying no, or at least not no, but not yet, because I want to get things done yesterday. And I have that personality, which I think I would keep working until I dropped. But that wasn't great for the rest of my clinical caseload. It also wasn't very good for my family. It wasn't good for friends, all those sorts of things. So I think, though, what it has provided a little bit, when I got some of that protected time, I mean, I've got kids, and so they're little kids. And so what has been good is that I've got a day where I work from home and I drop them off at school in the morning and I hang out with them before school. And so that's actually been quite good. Like, while I've got extra work to do, definitely, I can work till 2 o'clock in the morning if I need to, but I've got a little bit of time with them. So I think from my perspective in the burnout type of thing, it means that at least I get a bit of protected time and a bit of flexibility that I would never have got in my clinical job. And then the last thing, I suppose, is that I was getting a bit bored as a clinical speech pathologist, and I think this has meant that I'm less bored at work. Yeah.
Anne, do you want me to go next? So I think just speaking about the clinicians that we work with, I think, and one of the things Emma said really does resonate with me in terms of, I think what I've observed is that the main driver is around helping their patients. So they're basically saying, I can't do anything about this, and it's quite annoying, and I really want to do something about it. And so there's a real motivation there it's probably two strands: helping their patients, making their lives easier, but also making the clinicians' lives easier, and not just their own. We work with a group of rehabilitation physicians here, and so they've got physios and OTs and a whole team around them, and they always say to us, you can't develop technology that makes things more difficult. It has to be easier. So it's not taking up more time for the clinician. So that's something that I think is really resonated with me. I think the boredom part is also another interesting one. I do get a lot of contacts from clinicians who are interested in doing research degrees. And I had one just this week, an ophthalmologist who came to me and sort of said, I'm at that stage where I'm pretty much, my clinical work's pretty, I'm into it. My kids are at the stage where they're kind of getting independence. I'm actually a bit bored. I want to do something a bit more, creative. So what can I do? And so really thinking about that sort of when you do have a bit of bandwidth, but completely agree. I can only just agree with Emma and say you do have to learn to say no sometimes. Yeah.
All really good points. And I think from my perspective, when we launched the commercialisation training program, my goal, my aim with that program work and co-developing that with Cicada was just to, build capacity in the system. how do we build capability and capacity for people to, if they want to progress their IP. And what we got was a whole bunch of creative, enthusiastic, highly motivated, they don't sleep kind of people going through that program, because they wanted something different. And the opportunities for having if it was an academic pathway, like or tenure, were getting more and more limited because of the way that the grants, the competitive nature of grants. So what we did was we gave an alternative pathway to people. We made it flexible in terms of how to work around what they were doing, and we found that they had great appeal to women, and particularly women at that stage of their career where they're juggling everything. But I also found too that women were less likely to apply, but when women did apply, they were more successful going through the program, because the program is about, and as Emma mentioned, the multidisciplinary team, relationships, understanding how to navigate difficulty, and while not leaving sackcloth and ashes behind you kind of thing. And those skills that you don't want to be sort of generic. I've seen there's been some really wonderful male founders that I've come across, but certainly find that in the female founder or the women that are doing this, they're just able to navigate. Yes, there's the technical and all of that, but this is all about people. This really comes down to people, the people that you're trying to help, but also the people that you need to work with. And they're the really resounding things that have come out of my work to date in this part of the life sciences sector.
Thanks for that. I just wanted to ask a question as well, just taking chair's prerogative. Intellectual property. So I guess for people that work in a public hospital system, I've kind of always had this idea that if you work in a public hospital system and you come up with an idea that it kind of, is it yours? Is it the hospitals? Is it their patients? Who owns this intellectual property? Is it yours? Who does it belong to? And how do you work out whether it's yours or not?
I might take a stab at this one, if that's okay. Now, this is not for all of your colleagues. This is but most. So let me just talk about New South Wales. We have launched and are implementing the New South Wales Health intellectual property arising from public health organisations. So there's certain obligations. You have to go back and refer to your contract to see what your obligations are. But generally, as a general rule, you will have a stake in your IP. But generally what happens is that, particularly in our world, you're highly unlikely to take it forward all by yourself. And so there'll be sunk costs from the hospital or from the public health system. Sometimes you'll be working also with the university, particularly if you've got a conjoint appointment. So it's important to say, particularly if you've developed that using resources and your IP within your clinical work, that is likely to be something that's shared with the health system that you're in. But it really depends on the IP policies that are in place and what your obligations are under your contract. And it's really important to go back and refer to that before you have something really well developed and then everyone wants a piece of it. The other thing too is that when you're, and Laura, you'll be able to comment on this as well, when you are developing and you are raising money, grants are a little easier because they're undiluted funds and there's not a lot of people trying to pull it apart. But once you start trying to raise capital, investors want to know that who they're actually dealing with. They don't want to get to the end of a negotiation and go, oh, actually, it's not Pecky we should have been dealing with. She should have been dealing with, the tech transfer office over there, right? And that's a disaster. You want to have that all sorted out and all agreed to. And you may want to share that inventorship as well. And so it's really important to have those conversations really, really early and make sure that that's all really clearly articulated. But Laura, you also, from a university perspective, will have a view.
Yeah. No, I'm glad you took that one on first, because it's often the first question that we get asked is, how do you deal with IP? And I can remember Robin Ward. I don't know if you know Robin Ward, but I can remember her saying in a senior leaders meeting at one stage, IP, if I develop IP, I'm going to do it with my private hat on. And that was basically saying, I don't want to do it under the hospital because it's too difficult. I don't want to do it under the university because it's too difficult. And I think, that's one of the challenges we've had is when we get approached by clinicians is, which hat do you have on? And so are you doing this in your private practice? Are you doing it in your public practice, because obviously if you are in the public hospital system, you do have to consider that. So all of those things Anne said are really important. But I think one of the key things to make sure of is that no matter which one you're on, you actually have that conversation very early. Yeah. Because, you know, universities have got actually a pretty well-developed IP system, probably better developed than hospitals, and they usually have a lot more staff to deal with it. So often, and I'm saying this coming out of a university, often it's really important to make sure you protect it in whichever hat you have on, you protect it, or you work out some sort of, you know, non-disclosure type agreement before you actually go into any sort of, if you do have an actual technical idea. But it is one of the biggest questions. At Tyree Institute, we're actually a UNSW institute, but we've got a system where we've agreed with our IP guys that we can give a certain number of days assistance IP free. So we don't claim any IP when we're basically assisting in the early stages. So once you've got through that and you sort of think, okay, then there is potentially an unmet need there, and, you know, perhaps there is a technology solution, then that's where you need to actually be careful of you know, developing the IP and protecting the IP appropriately.
Okay, so I guess my next question now, and this is probably more for you, Laura, is I have a brilliant idea, but it's an idea that I haven't quite worked out the engineering and things for, because that's not my forte.
Absolutely.
Is this when I ring you and I say, hey, can we catch up for a coffee and I need to talk to you about how do I get this engineered? Is that what my next step would be if I have a brilliant idea?
So yeah, I think the thing is again, to make sure, you may have a brilliant idea, but I had fantastic clinician who we're still working with on other things, but he came to me and he said, I've got this fantastic idea. He said, I'm an oral maxillofacial surgeon. And he said, and what happens is we basically lift the whole face up and we're dealing with things. So we can't see the eyes to monitor the pupillary index for traumatic brain injury. So what we want to do is get a contact lens and put all the electronics into it to do that. And so it can be popped on the eye. And so you don't have to see it. It's basically Bluetoothing all the information out. Anyway, this was his idea. And I said, look, it's fantastic. Let me have a look at it. I had a look. Google's already done it. So basically, there's patents out there for monitoring pupillary index. Google's already done this contact lens, which has all the embedded electronics. So, you know, to actually patent that would be almost impossible. And so it was pretty easy just to sort of say, look, you know, it might not be available now, but it's something that would be very difficult to protect. And if you can't protect it, it's very difficult to have competitive advantage in the market. And you may not want to make money, but if you can't make enough to sustain the business, you can't keep producing the product. And so it does have to be a feasible business, even if you don't want to make money. I'm actually all for, and I think there's some fantastic social enterprises around where basically all of the money goes back to support, you know, a particular social enterprise. So it might be disability or something like that, but you still have to make money. Yeah. I'm not sure if I answered your question fully.
No, that was actually, well, sort of answered my question, but it was that idea of, I suppose, if you have a brilliant idea, you better check that no one else has had your brilliant idea first.
Yeah, and it's that sort of thinking about it from your clinical perspective. You're really well placed to actually work out, is this an important unmet need? And one of the things I say to clinician colleagues is just sort of, you know, talk to other colleagues and find out who cares, you know, who really cares about that. Is that something that, you know, it's only bothering me, or is it actually bothering all of my colleagues? And if it's bothering all your colleagues, then it's definitely a problem. And then I guess the other aspect of it is you know, looking at competitive advantage, what's out there, but you probably know what's out there. You know a lot of that side of things. So at that stage, when you're at that stage, sure, contact us. We'll have a chat. But there's you know, as Emma said, different institutions have, you know, often have support, and you need to know what's in your institution. We're pretty Catholic about who we talk to, but I think, you know, check what's in your own institution as well.
All right. We do have a question. So from Jade, I'm curious if Laura, Emma, and Annie always saw themselves as entrepreneurs, keen to invent, or was it more of a process?
Absolutely not.
Go, Emma.
I can go. I remember before about 2 years before my PhD saying I'd never do a PhD, and then I became a PhD, and then I remember thinking never thought that was even an option. And then, but I think that's the beauty of the people around you. So I was whinging. I presented to an MDT. The way that ours came about was, again, this unmet need, patients that were keeping coming, and we couldn't treat them. And then I presented all of my problems to the head and neck MDT one morning, and then Jonathan Clark called me into his room and said, this is a big problem, let's have a chat about it. Then we pulled an engineer into it, and then all of a sudden there was a process. So no, I mean, obviously it's probably different for different people, but for me it was very much an evolution of changing. And I think when Laura was saying before about it being creative, an opportunity to be creative, I think that's when you sort of jump on that. And it wasn't the right time for me personally or professionally, to be honest, but it was one of those things where the idea though was like a once in a lifetime to date opportunity that you kind of felt like it was the right thing to jump in for me.
I'm actually, I wouldn't call myself an entrepreneur at all. I'm more on the side of, I'm a researcher, and being in biomedical engineering, you naturally go towards trying to solve problems in medicine. And so I've worked with, throughout my career, I've worked with a lot of industry. And so that's been something that's been really exciting, because you can actually solve problems that are going to help things go into a medical device, or if not a new one, an improved one. So I think it's just seeing your ideas actually be integrated into practice or into a particular device. And so I think for me, it's much more about, I think, the discovery and problem solving. But now that over the last few years that I've been involved with the Institute, I think what I'm enjoying most is actually sort of, I guess, mentoring and just having conversations with people about the process, because I think the process is important. And I think just talking to Fiona Wood, you could hear the frustration at the fact that the problem was really that she didn't understand the process, and there was, you know, there was sort of times that she just was completely off the track, the right track, and that was really frustrating for her, and obviously something that could have taken 10 years took 25 years. So it's really, yeah, very challenging.
Yeah. And I'm slightly different again for me. I'm a public servant, have been like all my career basically. And so you'd think that I wouldn't be that entrepreneurial, but I would hazard to say that when you're in front of a very passionate minister who 13 years ago said, I want you to set up a medical device fund. I've put that as my platform for this election. We said we're setting one up. I want one. I said, what really do you want, Minister? What do you really want? What is success? And she goes, oh, look, I don't know how you do it. I just want the next Cochlear or ResMed. And I went, okay.
That was Gillian Skinner, wasn't it?
And I went, okay. So, which was, then I had to get very creative, because nothing like this had been done before. But then I drew on all of, like, you know, the people that I knew in universities, industry, at the federal government level, VC, investors, you know, family offices, and said, well, what wouldn't you do? And then go from there. So for me, I've just lived vicariously through all of you in terms of what you've created, but just absolutely wanted to just remove obstacles, to be a facilitator, to triage issues, and just to make it work. you know, for people that really have just brilliant ideas that just need to get out of the, I guess, the research frame and into things that we can use, and to keep them here and to treat our patients here. So I guess that's my perspective on my journey. But I think you probably, what resonates, we're all problem solvers.
Absolutely.
Absolutely. And I mean, if you even think about the cochlear implant and how amazing that has been and how that has changed the world. And, you know, I was reading somewhere, and I suppose Pyle putting in cochlears would know that I was reading that they are now doing it so that you can actually go overseas and people will speak in a language and your cochlear will just automatically translate it for you, like Google Translate. And so now you just need to take someone with a cochlear implant when you go traveling. And so I just think that's fantastic. And, you know, who knows what's coming out. I'm a vascular surgeon, and we've seen technology in vascular surgery change so dramatically over the last sort of 20, 30 years. And that's the same in sort of every medical specialty. So I think that for all the people that are here today listening to this webinar, that, you know, there is really an opportunity that something will twig one day and you might go, gee, that's a great thing. I should think about how do I go about that? So it's been amazing. And do we have any more questions from the audience? Because we are always slated to go for 2 hours, but we normally all get exhausted by 90 minutes. But today it's only been 60 minutes, but I don't want to cut people short. If you're, you can just type in the chat. For some reason, the chat seems to be a little bit going to just Monique, but Monique is letting me know if there's any questions in the chat. So wait, I can see something. Okay, so somebody has said he's a biomedical engineer starting out in the industry. I'm really passionate about co-designing with clinicians to address real unmet needs. I'd love to connect with surgeons at the early idea stage. Do you have any advice on how someone like me can build those connections and put myself out there and get involved from the start? So actually, maybe Pyle, I know you're not on the panel, but you might be, how would, you know, how does a biomedical engineer get in touch with all of us surgeons?
Well, I mean, I think this is where, you know, I might throw back to you, Pecky, in terms of the role of the state committee, as state committee chair. But as you know, as part of the state committee, and we're hoping, you know, widely through the college, we do have a program called Beyond Science that runs, and we're always happy to, the purpose is to work cross-disciplinary to support clinicians and scientists. And Laura is on the panel, and Emma's presented as part of, you know, that program, and Anne's on the advisory board. So we're all sort of, you know, there to provide support for the network. So if somebody did have an idea that they were looking for a clinician partner, you know, welcome to reach out to that network. And if we can identify someone who's interested, you know, we'll play Tinder for the minute, but, you know, hopefully in the future, one of our engineers will set up a Tinder app of clinicians and scientists who can find each other faster.
So yeah, and I think that would be, you know, to get in touch with even the state committee and say, hey, I'm just looking for somebody. All the different subspecialties have also got surgical societies. And so you can, if it's something specific to a surgical society, you can actually write to that surgical society and say, I'm interested in somebody who might be, you know, interested in research. And definitely, we also have an academic section within the College of Surgeons who are all surgeons who are interested in academia. So that's also another way that you can reach out to that committee and say, you know, I've got an interest in this particular thing. Is there someone that you can put me in touch with? So there's definitely ways, and you can just get in touch with the college and the staff, and they can definitely help you. We've got a question here from someone as well, which says, hi, I'm on a different path. I have global priority IP, but I'm having difficulty finding university partners, as most want the IP to have been produced within the institutions. Any advice would be greatly appreciated.
So, Catherine, I
Yep.
think the question really is back to you. And what sort of partnership are you looking for? Because universities typically are there to do research and teaching, and then they happen to possibly do something on the side to produce IP. So if somebody has produced it outside, it depends what they're asking for. So I guess the question would be, what do you actually want to do?
So, yeah, sorry, thank you. So I'm looking for partners or collaborators to do the clinical validation and then the clinical trials. So I'm going the reverse, where I've gone, as a health professional, I've gone out in private, but now coming back into the universities to try and validate. So looking at partnering with, you know, for example, Monash University, but a lot of them don't want to talk to you because they really want the IP. But if you already own that IP or have exclusive rights globally, then the negotiation tends to, to be more difficult.
Yeah, no, that's helpful. I think the key thing is that if you wanted to do some validation, then that work has to be funded. So I would be looking at, are there any avenues for you to actually go for some funding programs? So whether it's a development grant, NHMRC has a development grant. I think they give you up to, it's around $1 million. And you usually have a scientific program and a business program. There's not, under the ARC, there's not really anything that can support that, but MRFF may have some funds, but there are NHMRC clinical trials funds as well, but you'd probably want to set yourself up as an industry partner and go to the universities and collaborate with them on that basis. And they will collaborate. If you're just going to them with IP and saying, I've got my IP, I want to collaborate, it's a lot more difficult.
Yeah, so that's what I'm doing at the moment. So I'm looking at the opportunity to go back and do a PhD as a through an industry partnership. But the problem is funding access, especially with the MHRC and even the medical device research fund. You have to have a partnership with the universities. And when you go and look at industry partnership, they want the IP, or they want the majority of the IP. So what I've had to do is to look at it more from a, I guess, creative point of view, where we're actually licensing off a part of our IP to competitors to fund ourselves, because a lot of the time access to fundings, as you say, has to be with a university or a hospital, and they want the IP, or they will say we need that IP to have originated from the university or the hospital. So that's where, you know, when you go the reverse, it's very difficult.
So Anne may have some other things to add to that.
It's a tough one, because it's not really that they just want an equity stake to offset their costs. I think that's usually what they're after. If you're not going to give grant money or funding to support whatever they're going to run, then they want to get something in return. Hospitals, not so much. They're not that. Sorry, apologies if we've got, you know, Royal Melbourne on here or somewhere, because you're a bit more sophisticated, but hospitals generally not as sophisticated as that. Universities are very sophisticated in that way. Gosh, I'm just trying to think. Did you say that you're based, Catherine? Did you say you're based in Victoria?
Yes, I am. So, and I do understand. We have approached a few universities and hospital and have offered a fair negotiation of the IP. But it's always difficult from a power status.
Of course it is. Yes. So I don't have any immediate things that come to mind, other than there is funding through the Victorian government to support industry to develop, you know, things. If you're setting yourself up as an industry kind of group, as a startup.
Yeah, you
so
did. You
Looking
did.
yeah.
sorry, Laura, you go.
I was just going to say, you did also mention doing a PhD. Was that part of because that's another complicating factor. And one thing I suggest is you look at different institutions' IP policies, because UNSW, for example, higher degree researchers own their own IP unless they sign a deed poll assigning it to the university. So I do suggest you have a look at different universities' IP policies.
Yeah, so I applied for the National University Industry PhD program, where the industry, which is my startup, nominates the PhD candidate, which is myself.
Oh, that's very conflict of interest-y.
Power attorney is being
Tricky.
transferred to other people. So.
Tricky.
But anyway.
Interesting.
Thank you.
Thing that just shows that there is a lot of things that we might not think about and some issues. So it's always good to have this open conversation and to think about what avenues are open to help people with these when you get these new ideas. I guess if it was easy, we'd all be multimillionaires and be listing our companies on the share market, right? Emma, I was just curious as to you sort of talked about the potential sort of profits from the company, and you said, look, we're not in this to make profits, we're in this, to help people, which is really fantastic, but really not even a little bit of profits.
I mean, that would be nice, wouldn't it? But I think so. Ours is an institutional agreement as well. So in terms of how much money we're going to make, it's not going to be a large amount. So it's a combined thing between Lifehouse, where I work, and then our engineer works for Sydney Local Health, and so they're the two big players. University of Sydney were involved for a minute because there's a couple of us have collaborations with them, but that's ended up not being a big player. And then so the two different hospitals wanted a piece of the pie. And as I think, I can't remember when either Anne or Laura mentioned, as soon as you get the IP involved, everybody wants a piece of that pie. And so then there's 3 inventors, and so it gets divided up pretty quickly, I think, in terms of the profits. But our aim was, this is almost like a test. I think Restorabite is the first device that's been commercialized or even developed through Lifehouse. And so because it's been class 1 medical device, overall the institution was mostly interested about the learning process, about how to go through the, so I mean, part of the value is that, right, is understanding what a QMS system is, and how do you approach a TGA application and all of those sorts of things. So that in itself has been a valuable process for us at our institution. And then we had some very good advice. And so the part of meeting industry through some of those awards that we went through and some of the other programs was understanding, right, this is the net cost, this is then how you need to double it at least, and then probably more than double the cost of what all of your basic costs are. And it's not just the materials, it's all of the it's the personnel, and it's the packaging, and it's the wastage, and it's the marketing, and it's all the different things. And so thinking through all those different costs and then adding those on top of, our device costs about $5 worth of material. Maybe it's more than that. But then so then actually it ends up going more like, yeah, I mean that's yeah, probably less. And even less if we end up going into injection mold manufacturing. But then if we want to change that, that's a huge amount of cost. And so I think there's just so many costs to go into it, from a personnel, from a even the depreciation of the printers that we so when we were working out what the cost is that we're going to commercialize it at, it was far above what we had hoped it to be. And so but one of the tricky then thing that we were balancing is the whole point of we wanted to make this device was partly to make it safer than the commercial alternatives, but it was supposed to be cheaper as well. And so having something that's accessible for our patients, because as soon as it's costly, our patients won't be able to afford it. And that was the barrier. So we didn't want to, create our new this exactly the same barrier that had been in the old device. So we wanted to keep costs down. And so that played off a little bit with how much we were going to make personally. So we all have like a small sliver, but it's a nominal amount, which won't make any of us millionaires. But it is a nice incentive, I suppose. But I think for us in our particular case, it was that learning curve that's been really, really valuable. And it sort of fits part of, it's also then that process and that innovation and what we've been able to do has then been able to feed into some grants and stuff that has meant that we can do other programs. And there's a Centre of Research Excellence at Lifehouse, which Restorabite has contributed to part of, you know, the evidence for and the outputs for. And so I think that's where you kind of think it's a broader you know, for us, it wasn't just one device that we were creating, it's a broader research program, and it's the direction of our institution, and it's the personnel that are involved and the networks that are involved. And so I think I know that's a long answer to your question, but I think it's probably just a little bit more, for us, it was a little bit more than just the money, and not just from being like a naive clinician as well. Speech pathologists tend to be pretty poor. But I think it ends up being, it's been a really valuable experience for more than just the money that we perhaps get from it. Maybe at some stage. I have not been paid for a Restorabite just yet. I might one day.
I think that's a great answer, to be honest. I think all of us, when we all first decide to become doctors, we don't decide because of money. We usually decide because we want to help people. And that's one of the things that we do. And I do think that it's just like training, isn't it? You make some device, you learn how to do it, and then maybe you might make something else that might be more more lucrative in the future. Who knows? And so it's all about that learning and doing that. So look, it's just been really amazing and fantastic to have all of you come and join us today, and to just listen to your story, Emma, of what you've done, and Laura, to have your expertise and your scientific background and just your knowledge has been great. And Anne, thank you so much for setting this up when you got asked to by the minister, because I know that there's people on this webinar who's probably maybe this will sort of gel, and you'll be in your showers and all of a sudden you might think of something, or there will be people who will watch this webinar. We had over 100 people that are registered, so we know that most people will catch up with it later on YouTube through the college website, and this may definitely spark some innovation. So I just want to say thank you so much to coming and speaking to us today, and thank you so much to everyone that's online. I know it's always hard at the end of a long day to sign up for the webinars, but I really appreciate you joining us. And it's really great to keep bringing these new topics in to surgery, and to really show women that we can also achieve things that perhaps might not have crossed our minds, just because we're so busy doing a few other things with our lives as well. So thank you all so much. Really, really great session today.
Thank you.
Thanks, Pecky, and thanks, Pael, and thanks, co-speakers. It was really, really fun.
Thank you. Take care, everybody. Thank you so much.
Thank you.
Thank you very much.
Thanks. Bye.